Caleb Laura, playing against Trinidad, was called by the square leg umpire, umpire Lala of Trinidad, for throw-in of all things. Most people thought that Lala was mad. They thought he just had to be a lunatic of the worst order, in that Caleb Laura had the cleanest action you could imagine, flowing windmill action that never looked like anything resembling a jerk or throw. Absolutely clean action. But then it was thought that calling of Caleb Laura was an intended effect to try and throw him out, to put him out of stride in respect of getting a place on the West Indies team. And that was because there were one or two youngsters from Trinidad and Tobago in Imshan Ali, and Imtiaz Ali, and Rafiq Jumadeen and so on, and they felt that Caleb Laura would be an obstacle to those players getting into the West Indies team. This is sad, a very lamentable commentary on the petty politics of these islands. And there was a lot of this going on at one time. Maybe it still is there. But the point is this: Caleb Laura will probably go down as the best spin bowler never to have played for West Indies. And in my view, I'm saying it right now, I think the discredit or dishonor was not to Caleb Laura, but I think to West Indies cricket. He should have and ought to have played for West Indies. Now, I have asked the question, what has happened in respect of what we might consider a fitting memorial to Caleb Laura? One asks the questions, one or two questions. What has happened to cricket at the St. Mary's Academy? Caleb Laura played for Dominica just about the time he was attending St. Mary's Academy as a student. What has happened? What has happened to the momentum in that regard? Have we had any other youngsters coming through to play for Dominica while attending St. Mary's Academy? The only one, Clem John, who came through at the age of 16 or 17 later and played for Dominica and eventually for combined Windward and Leeward Islands. I think something has to be done, something has to be looked at forcibly. Why can't we unearth more talent at St. Mary's Academy, at Dominica Grammar School, and of course at one or two other secondary schools as well, where you do have boys? The point is this: there ought, I believe, to be named at the St. Mary's Academy a house, whether it be a new house or whatever it is, after Caleb Laura. I think it would be fitting. He deserves it. It would be an admirable gesture. So I think that in itself should be done. The next question I'm asking, what has happened to cricket at St. Joseph and the West Coast area? Caleb Laura emerged from St. Joseph and the West Coast area. We have had one or two other players coming through. At one time, we had players like David Defoe, Joey Pear, and eventually we had Roy Marshall, stalwart player for Dominica, St. Joseph, Somerset, Dominica, combined Windward and Leeward Islands, and so on. He played, and Roy Marshall was a pillar of strength for Dominica in both batting and spin bowling. But what has happened of late? What do we have? We need, I think, to look at the situation and see how it can be improved in respect of the development that we sorely need young players need to be coming through and making their mark, their impact on Dominica cricket, Windward's cricket, and so on, and if necessary, I'm sure, into West Indies cricket. So I am asking, what is the position with regard to cricket at St. Joseph? I think when we look at the legacy that we would like to see extended in respect of Caleb Lora, I think we need to have a playing field of consequence established at St. Joseph. I recall some very many years ago, and that was, I think it was in the early 80s, so at least 20 odd years ago, I went in a group to see a potential site for playing field at St. Joseph, and Caleb Lora was among those who visited, and a number of persons from the St. Joseph sporting community. And the location was just eastward of the village and sort of adjacent to the Isaiah Thomas Secondary School. There I thought a very good playing field, extensive, to be able to cater comfortably for cricket and football. That in effect should be developed in that particular area, and of course it would in all probability be called the Caleb Lora Memorial Playing Field or Park, whatever it is. I think that needs to be done, because the time is overdue really for us to be getting the benefit of talent emerging, or further talent emerging from the St. Joseph area and the West Coast area in general. A playing field of that sort of stature would bring excellent cricketers to play there, cricketers from the rest of the region. Such time as a regional match is being played in Dominica, you can have the odd match being played there. So players could see the top performers from the various territories, and certainly I think this will encourage the youngsters from St. Joseph and the rest of the West Coast area to move forward and to present themselves as the excellent talent, the excellent potential that is available in this particular area. So that is an initiative that I think that ought to be pursued. It ought to be pursued for the benefit of the players at St. Joseph. When you look at the playing field on which Caleb Lora learned to play, the playing field is not too much bigger, not too very much bigger than Peebles Park. I may be overstating it, particularly in that respect, but that in itself gives you an indication of this sort of lack of the sort of facility that is in effect needed at St. Joseph. They play football there as well, and certainly it has to be football of a very congested nature, you know, because the field at St. Joseph is much smaller than the field at Newtown, and Newtown's field is considered small by any standards, you know. So it means that there's a lot to be done. Who knows? There may be another youngster of the same order of Caleb Lora waiting to be unearthed, or probably not being unearthed simply because of a lack of appropriate facilities that would encourage growth and development. So that is something I believe we ought to be looking at. And I would be willing, of course, to engage a number of former cricketers in that particular regard and see what can be done. I think the diaspora should be encouraged to look at this